Good afternoon, this is Arthritis New Zealand, and we're shortly about to start our webinar for parents of children who have arthritis. We're just waiting for a couple of minutes and then we'll be underway. Welcome to our webinar hosted by Arthritis New Zealand. I'm delighted to introduce the two people who will be with us for this webinar. Anne Hawker, who's the Principal Disability Advisor for the Ministry of Social Development, and Dr. David Bratt, who's Principal Health Advisor for the Ministry of Social Development. David and Anne, we're very grateful that you've made time. We do have questions, and people sometimes find the process, particularly around child disability allowance, confusing. So we appreciate you making yourselves available for this webinar. And just a note for people that we're not going to be discussing people's individual cases and circumstances, but we will cover how you go about getting information for your individual circumstances. David and Anne are here to give a brief overview of the benefit available and then to answer questions. So on your screen you'll have the question and answer button. You can type a question in and we'll see those questions coming in. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much. In your introductions, one of the points you outlined was that we weren't going to be here to answer individual circumstances. However, you probably want to know how to go about if you have an individual situation and how do you get them answered. First thing I think is to make contact with Working Income. You can do that through the contact centre, or if you have a case manager, by contacting, either going in for an appointment, emailing Working Income. The second route is, if you're still not able to get your issue resolved, is to contact Francisca, who will then be able to work through and provide answers to your questions. We'd like to move on because it's been identified that one of the issues raised is around the child disability allowance. I'll ask David to outline, in terms of the child disability allowance, the criteria, whether or not it's means tested, and the process for applying for a child disability allowance.
Thank you, Anne, and welcome. I accept that the child disability allowance is confusing, mostly by name, because there's a disability allowance and a child disability allowance. I think the simple distinction, before I give a little more detail, is a child disability allowance, by the way, formerly in the past known as the handicapped child allowance, is particularly around care and attention as opposed to the specific condition, whereas the disability allowance is around the additional costs that are incurred. So that's just a simple overview. Child disability allowance, care, disability allowance, cost. So for a child disability allowance is paid to the principal caregiver, who has to provide significantly more care and attention to a child with a disability that is significantly in excess of what a child of the same age would be expected to have. Because obviously children at all sorts of ages require attention, but the degree of intensity of that varies from the little ones who are totally dependent to your older ones who you wish weren't quite so independent. Perhaps this may cause some confusion for you, and although we've indicated we can't solve your individual problems today, it may well be that your individual circumstance illustrates the confusion that you have. So we certainly can discuss any confusion that arises out of that. So if you feel that you're aware that your child has a disability, and that disability is incurring some significant extra time on your behalf, more than you would ordinarily expect, then you might reasonably be expected to be qualified for a child disability allowance. And as Anne has indicated, the first port of call would be the Work and Income Office, either directly to the office or through the contact centre. And the reason for that is you need an application form which happens to include a medical certificate. Most doctors do not have these forms or the medical certificates because there's so myriad forms that doctors have to fill out. It would be impossible to keep them all in their premises. So you would then complete your part of that. Now, I guess an important part of the Child Disability Allowance, which distinguishes it from every other benefit available through work and income, is it does not have an income or asset test to it. So anybody in New Zealand with a child with a disability that feels they incur significant extra care and attention can apply for a child disability allowance. And just for your information, about half of the people receiving it are not beneficiaries. So it is not a requirement to be on a benefit or to qualify for a community service card in order to apply for a child disability allowance. Hopefully that is reasonably clear.
One of the things that's also important, as David said, is the child disability allowance. While usually eligibility can last to 16, in many circumstances, the extra care and attention provided by the principal caregiver does not last that whole period. And so that, and particularly as you anticipate young people to learn to manage, particularly where it's an ongoing disability, to learn to manage that disability so that it will be for the period of time that the extra care and attention is required. We do recognise that the disability or the condition will last longer.
Yes, I think that's quite important. It is not diagnosis driven. So we accept, as Anne has just indicated, that the disability itself, whatever it may be it a health condition or some other form of disability, will quite likely last perhaps all of their lives or certainly some time, but the amount of care and attention will diminish. One of the questions that may arise is, can your GP make a referral to them for a child disability allowance or for a disability allowance for that matter? Yes, they can suggest to you that you may be eligible in case you had not thought of that, because there's no question there are caregivers out there, usually parents obviously, who would be eligible for a child disability allowance who have not applied because they didn't recognise they would be eligible. This is probably particularly true for those people who don't access any other forms of support through work and income. And as I've emphasised earlier, you do not need a community service card to apply. I guess one of the confusing things, and Anne's hinted at this, is what constitutes significant care and attention. And I guess that I'm loath almost to use this expression, but to some extent that's a common sense sort of judgment in a way, is what might you reasonably expect. Now, my child with a bit of reading difficulty who needs a bit of extra care at night with their homework probably does not constitute significant care and attention. But a young, newly diagnosed child with celiac disease who needs guidance as to what they should be able to eat obviously does while they're younger. But clearly, as they get older and understand that situation, they may not like it, but they usually understand it, then that level of care and attention would drop off. There are a whole range of conditions where this would clearly be true.
There's also, in terms of arthritis, it may be that part of working with a young person is an adjustment to a change in life, around learning to pace, to plan, those sort of activities which require greater input and support from parents. Getting people into a regular medication routine, particularly if they don't want to be seen to be different to their peers. The fact that people who have episodic conditions may have periods where they require more care and attention than at other times. and may require more regular, mum may not be available for work because she's having to come and pick the young person up from school because things have fallen over. That's often in the behavioural areas of disability.
I guess another question that's commonly asked around child disability, just so really don't have a television future, do I? Child disability allowance, how much do you get? Well, currently it's, well, and this is about to change in the weekend actually, is $47.64. This is not taxed, by the way. It's a tax-free amount of money, so it's not considered in your normal income. The reason I mentioned the 1st of April is that all benefits administered by Work and Income are adjusted by the Consumer Price Index on the 1st of April. So it will change, and I'm sorry I don't know what it will go up to, but you can imagine it's going to be about $48.
And one of the things that brings us to is really important, this information, and the best source of information is the Work and Income website. It outlines quite clearly around the process you need to go through, around how to apply. It keeps you up to date in terms of the amount of information, and it gives you the outline of the qualifications required, including residential requirements. The second question that was probably raised is, as David said, there's confusion between the child disability allowance and the disability allowance. So what is the disability allowance about? So that's around the extra cost related to a person's disability. And it may include areas such as, now that is means tested. So unlike the child disability allowance, the disability allowance is means tested. One of the things that's important to identify is that you may be eligible for both the child disability allowance and the disability allowance, or one of them, depending on what is the driver of the need. The disability allowance covers a range of costs, medical fees, pharmaceuticals, power, alternative treatment, consumables, transport to treatment. So if you have to do regular visits to the specialist, you can apply for transport for treatment.
I'm not sure. I presume you mentioned that, of course, disability allowance is income tested, and therefore, but you don't need to be on a benefit to qualify for disability allowance. If you qualify for a community service card, and the way to check that if you don't have one, they're issued automatically to beneficiaries and anybody getting an accommodation supplement. But in fact, if you happen to look at the on the Work and Income website, by the way, that's Work and Income as one word, .govt.nz. Sorry, I can't make that appear on the screen like the clever people on breakfast in the morning. But that there is an eligibility guide, quite a big box in, I think, the top right-hand corner that will allow you to look for that, in which case you can certainly apply for a community service card that's providing now a number of benefits, such as cheaper doctor visits. A couple of other things about this. Well, first of all, the disability allowance. I wanted to go back to the child disability allowance briefly. A reasonable question is, do you need to take your child along and sort of wave them in front of a case manager and say, see, he's got a disability? No, there is no need to do that. Your doctor completing a form indicating there's a disability, preferably indicating the nature of the disability, and the best person to describe the extent of the care and attention is the person providing it. And as such, there have been reports where people have been asked to produce specialist reports. That should not be necessary the specialist is providing excellent professional clinical support, but the care and attention we're interested in here is the care and attention provided by the principal caregiver. So providing you do have a medical certificate that says there's a disability and an indication that extra care and attention is necessary, that in itself is not a qualification. Doctors do not grant benefits of any sort. They give us medical information, but there are a variety of other qualifying components, and hinted at those things like being a resident in New Zealand and those sorts of things that are required to be looked at before any form of support is available.
Yes. Some of you, we have heard people say, well, my doctor said I qualify, but I've then been asked about the care and attention. And that's just because as part of a conversation, the case manager who makes the decision needs to get an understanding around what is the care and attention that is required. They're not questioning the doctor's information they've provided, they're seeking additional information.
There's still widespread misunderstanding, particularly about whether just having the diagnosis and the condition may be the qualifying component. This was work and income actually having access to some advice on health conditions and disabilities is relatively recent, really only over the past 10 years. And prior to that, there was widespread misunderstanding in this space. The other most widespread misunderstanding, which I know Anne hinted at earlier, is once it's granted doesn't mean it's granted for the rest of the child's life. And another thing I just wanted to mention when I was thinking about the disability allowance, that applies to each individual, by the way. So each individual New Zealand resident is eligible from birth to death should they qualify under financial limitations for a disability allowance. So it's not like the prescription that, dispensation that says once you've had 20 prescriptions for your family, you don't have to pay again. Disability allowance applies to each individual.
One of the other things in terms of child disability allowance is that where a child is attending a childcare centre, they may be eligible for up to 50 hours of childcare, and their siblings may be eligible for that childcare as well. And that's a recognition of the substantial extra care and attention required by the parents.
Now, one of the areas that you may run into, well, I was thinking about this, I'm not sure if this has been any practical experience, but of course arthritis in young children is pretty uncommon. And for most people, and certainly most case managers, will be completely unaware that this is a condition that can cause significant disability and distress to both the child, but also the parents providing the support. And so having a clear indication about what is involved in this will be quite important, because it will be a condition outside the experience of the case manager. In fact, outside the experience of many GPs, actually, in many ways, it is not a common condition. I can think of, in my 30, 40 years as a general practitioner, having only a handful of children who had an inflammatory form of arthritis. So do keep that in mind, that you have possibly more information, more knowledge than people you're dealing with. However, they will be trying to do their best on your behalf.
I think the other thing that becomes a area of confusion is around if you have got a child disability allowance until the child turns 16, is that you may receive a letter from Working Income that invites you to apply for supported living payment. It doesn't indicate you are eligible for supported living payment, because the requirement around child disability allowance and supported living payment are quite different, or the eligibility criteria are quite different. But it does invite you to apply. And a number of parents have thought that meant the child could get a supported living payment. The requirements around a supported living payment are that the young person does not have the capacity to work for 15 hours or more over the next
2 years.
2 years, at least. It's not about the condition, it's about the impact of the condition on the capacity to work. What's the difference between the supported living payment and the job seeker? The job seeker is around that the impact on the capacity to work is not likely to last 2 years. That doesn't mean disability, and that's often where you've got episodic conditions, such as you may have fluctuations in your arthritis, and the child may have fluctuations in their arthritis that may mean that for a period of time they may not be able to work. However, it doesn't mean they can't work the full time, and what they are involved in may well change, and they go into study, and then they may move on to a sedentary type of job, or a variety of jobs, depending on the impact of the condition on what they can do functionally.
If normally a child is with allowance, by the way, stops at age 16, although if the child is still at school and still has a need for significant care and attention, it can be carried on until 18 if they're likely then to go on to further study or even consider work, given that it is, as Anne has already indicated, they're completely different issues. This originally arose out of the fact that people who got the former handicapped child allowance tended to have a level of disability that was beyond what's now envisaged under a child disability allowance, and in those days their future in work was not considered to be particularly high. As I'm sure you're aware, these days we recognise that irrespective of a level of disability, everybody has an expectation that they may be able to achieve appropriate work. And I say appropriate because each individual actually has different levels of capacity in considering a work option. And so the benefits for adults are around their capacity to work, be it long or short term. Hopefully that's reasonably clear. It is likely that, back to the processing, it is likely that you will need to go in and see to a work and income office to complete the application. You can't do it entirely online, but you certainly can get a lot of information both from online and from the contact centre. But you don't need to, the contact centre can make the appointment for you, by the way. Unfortunately, you can't make your appointment online at this stage. But you can make an appointment to go and see a case manager to get that benefit underway. How long does it last? Usually there's an indication on the medical certificate at what point it might be reasonable to review it. There are obviously, in some may well be, in an arthritis situation, that may well be anywhere between 2 and 5 years once it stems. From time of early diagnosis, there is likely to be quite a period of time while adjustments are made, medications are introduced, before you get any degree of sort of stability and adequate control that will allow you to pull back with the level of support required. That's not to say it might not continue to be required. That will be each and individual situation. And I guess that touches on another area that causes a lot of confusion. We get a lot of inquiries about, Bill next door gets this, why don't I? They've both got this condition. But it is very individual, and you'll be more than aware if you've been at any of the gatherings of parents with children with arthritis But each one just is a different situation. It is not one size fits all, almost for any condition really.
And children may have a variety of other factors that impact on them other than just arthritis. The other thing that really is important is when we look at, we've often been asked around SLP carers. So what's the difference between SLP care and child disability allowance? SLP care is that the level of care required for, in this case, that child is such that that child would otherwise be in a residential setting. We don't have most of the residential settings, but it's at a much higher level of care than that required for eligibility to CDA. For child disability allowance, sorry.
Yeah, don't forget so supported living payment carer, it means that the person concerned will not be able to work. They will need to be provided essentially full-time care and attention, whereas the child disability allowance is a significant extra care and attention, but you don't have to be by their side 24 hours a day. In simple terms, that would be the sort of distinction. It does come up from time to time.
Now, you've heard us outline some of the benefits. We really appreciate hearing from you any questions you may have to help clarify any or further questions you may have regarding any of the benefits we have talked about.
And I guess the other thing to add there is if you don't think of them right now, but think of them later, then do send them in to Arthritis New Zealand. We have a close connection. There is no problem with us being able to get an answer for you, particularly if you're getting some confusing information. Just occasionally, there are 8,000 employees in work and income, and some of the information changes, legislation, etc., and it can be quite hard to keep up. So if at times you feel you've been told one thing which doesn't seem consistent with what you've heard today, then please get in touch with Arthritis New Zealand and we'll ensure that you get back, and we get an answer back to you as quickly as possible.
While it is the case manager who makes the decision, you might come in and say, to work in income and say, I believe my child I'm eligible for CDA. They will then say you'll need to get this certificate completed by the doctor. That's providing us with some, as David said, clinical information. It doesn't mean you will automatically be eligible for it. And there's often some confusion because the doctor said this, that I'm automatically going to get it. And that's particularly probably around the supported living payment because there is still some confusion between the fact that the condition can last for a period of time, but that's not the same as the impact on the capacity to work. And that's the difference between the various benefits. There also is, with each, there are different work obligations with supported living, Jobseeker, and if you have a health condition, there are also different work obligations. So if you can only work 20 hours, you have a different obligation to someone who can work full-time or has the capacity to work full-time. And that's around looking for a job. If you're on supported living payment, that's about planning around what employment you might consider.
And that brings us to an end of the questions that people have submitted to us. Remember that you can submit questions to us after this webinar, and particularly if you're watching the link after we've broadcast the link. If you want to contact Arthritis New Zealand, you can call us on 0800 663 463. And if you have an inquiry particularly around child disability allowance, ask to speak to Francesca, who's the Manager of Awareness and Advocacy, and liaises with David and Anne. So with that, we will wrap up. I hope you found this useful. David and Anne, huge thanks to you. You have covered all the queries that we have coming in. So I really appreciate this, and this is going to be very useful for us whenever we have gatherings of parents who have children with arthritis. So sincere thanks from all three of us.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, and